We're ready for the start. They're off.
Welcome in, everybody, to It's Official. It's 1 PF post Flightline. I mean, we saw something that was historic on the calendar this past weekend. Jeff Siegel, Jeremy Plonk, and we're here to break it down every week with 5 topics, Jeff. But could we even come up with 5 that didn't involve Flightline after what we saw this weekend?
Well, we probably could, but nobody would care. So we
go.
might as well just talk about the story of the really the story of the year. This is the year of Flightline, and he doesn't dance many dances, but he sure puts on a show when he does. And I don't know how many more races or how many more opportunities we'll have to enjoy his incredible talents, but we certainly did at Del Mar last weekend. And I got to be honest with you, though, Jeremy. Someone asked me last week what I thought might happen. And I said, and I believed it at the time, I said there's a better chance of him winning by 20 lengths than there is of him losing.
Right.
And that's what happened. So what happened didn't surprise me. I know it did not surprise John Sadler. I'm not saying he thought he'd win by 19, but there wasn't really any great fear other than it's a horse race and anything can happen. But the way he had trained leading up to that race and the way he looked and the way he's been running and the margin of victories that he was accomplishing in shorter races, if you take and extrapolate that to 1.25 miles, and if you thought he could run that far, the 19 lengths wasn't that improbable. And he went out and did it, and let's hope that he can do it again.
And he did it over a quality field. We'll look at that race in the Pacific Classic. We'll look back at some of his other races, and we're going to get a chance to go down memory lane a little bit this weekend, because when you have a horse who's this good against his contemporaries, you've got to go somewhere else to find comparables, right? I mean, you just can't say, how does he stack up with Country Grammar? How does he stack up with Olympiad?
Yeah.
We're going to go back and we're going to dig up some names here. And you and I have been around a long time, so we get a chance to utilize a little bit of that experience with a horse who really does have historical implications. You know, Flightline, he's interestingly named because there's 2 definitions of Flightline. That could be the path that you're flying. And his Flightline has kind of been, California to New York for the Met Mile, and he's going to go to Kentucky. So his California, Kentucky, New York Flightline gets you through the big 3 metropolises of horse racing, and he's going to get a chance to dance all those if he makes the Breeders' Cup Classic. The other definition of Flightline is it's the area of the airport where they park the planes to work on them. And he has spent a lot of time parked in the barn and being worked on over the years. So Flightline, whether you see he's on the trajectory to an all-time great or has been a stop-and-go kind of repair job over his short, brief racing career, either one applies. And we're going to start off with our 5 topics this week. Our first of 5 topics includes none other than Flightline. He ran One for the Ages on Saturday at the Pacific Classic at Del Mar. We talked about it a little bit. We're going to let you see it for yourself. Right when Flightline decides it's time to go, this race was over.
A half mile to go, and Flightline doesn't want to wait. Flightline's picked up the running now, and he kicks on to lead it by a length with a half mile to go, and now he's widening. Flightline makes it 2, now 3 as they go into the far turn. Extra Hope is next. Country Grammar down at the rail. Stiletto Boy, Express Train, and still last is Royal Ship's going to come running, but he's got a good 10 lengths to make up on Flightline. Let's see, 1/4 mile to go in the Pacific Classic. Flavion Pratt and Flightline are an embarrassing lead. It must be 15 lengths as they turn for home now. And let's see, Flavion Pratt just shakes the reins at Flightline. And take a good look at this, because you're not going to see this too often, maybe never again. Flightline, 20 lengths clear. Flavion Pratt takes a hold and canters in the TVG Pacific Classic. Second place will go to Country Grammar. Then came Royal Ship, Express Train, Extra Hope, and Stiletto Boy.
savor and soak that in. His tremendous machine moment was an embarrassing lead from Trevor Denman. I love that line. I think that's one that'll stick with him, and you're going to hear in the Stallion commercials. An embarrassing lead for Flightline. Jeff, give us your take on this. How does this race stack up with some of the greats you've seen?
I was thinking about it. I've seen some great races, and great performances and great races aren't always the same. For example, I think back to Zenyatta's win out here at Santa Anita in the Breeders' Cup Classic. You know, this is unbelievable race again. Trevor with that. You know, one of the most memorable, of course, was American Pharaoh's win at Belmont in the Belmont Stakes when he broke that long Triple Crown streak. He finally won one, and the reaction from the fans that day was so memorable. But again, those races, as great as they were, pale in comparison to the actual performance that Flightline performed here. I mean, go Zapper when he won the Breeders' Cup Classic at Lone Star in 2004. Great race. But again, if you look at it in the context of this race, it was good, but it wasn't this.
Right.
I really have to go back, honestly, to Spectacular Bid for me. In terms of pure brilliance, performance, I remember his Malibu win when he won 7/8 and 120 and here beat Flying Paster and Relaunch and those kind of horses, top class horses, and did it, you know, easily. I go back to him. And of course, Secretariat's Belmont is the benchmark for all great performances. So I think this race, to me, based on the margin of victory and what he did to some maybe not great horses, but good horses,
very good
tells me that this was one of the great performances that I've ever seen. And I don't know if I'll ever see one again like it.
I can't quite go back as far as you do, and that's the great thing about our shows. You have a different era perspective than I have, and for me, the up close and personal element of this, the greatest single performance I saw in person up close was Rachel Alexandra winning the Belmont or winning the Kentucky Oaks by 20 and a lengths. It was under Calvin Burrell the day before Burrell won the Mind That Bird Kentucky Derby with the stunning upset. But Rachel Alexandra was just. I was fortunate enough to be on the notes team for that. I did NBC. I did the notes team for the track. And I was standing along the rail when she galloped by, and like every hair on my body stood up. And that's like a cliche. You hear that, but it actually happened. And you knew in that moment, you just saw something incredible. There have been big blowouts before, right? You can see a big blowout at Belterra today in a claiming race, but in a Kentucky Oaks situation with 100,000 plus there, national TV audience, I believe that year it was on Bravo as I looked back to try to find the video of it. That was a phenomenal individual performance from a horse you knew was good going in and great coming out after you saw it. And to me, that's what made that so special. Smarty Jones Preakness, I think, is one of the most underrated races of the last 20 years. He won that by a record margin that day by 11.5 lengths, the largest margin of victory in the Preakness. The three horses behind him, Rock Hard 10, Ettery, and Lionheart. They went on to win like the Don, the Santa Anita handicap, and were already a grade 1 winner in Lionheart. He beat a great field and toyed with them in a complete gallop. And so I think those are like two of the most visually impressive performances I've ever seen live. This one on video for Flightline obviously trumps either one of those to me. I think it's the most spectacular performance that I can really remember in, say, the Breeders' Cup era. You go back to 1984 with the inaugural Breeders' Cup, and you kind of look at like eras of horse racing, right? You know, the glory years, the 70s were so great. So if you take the Breeders' Cup era, 84 to present, I can't recall a performance better than what we saw from Flightline.
Well, I actually probably should have mentioned Rachel. You brought it up, and I'm glad you did. I was I did that race live on HRTV with Lafitte, and we were stunned. And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, I've been in this game a long time. I've never seen anything like that. But that was in the context of her dominance over an obviously outclassed field, winning that race by, what was it, 20 lengths, something like that?
20 and a quarter.
Running a quarter. So
the quarter mattered.
Right. It's similar, obviously, but not beating this level. And I'm not saying that this group of Country Grammar and Royal Ship and Express Train and those kind of horses are great horses, although Country Grammar has won $10 million, so he's not exactly an empty stall. But for all of those horses in the same race,
Yeah.
I mean, one horse can run badly and you can make, these are all horses that were consistently triple-digit buyer horses. They consistently were running good, strong races. Royal Ship was coming off a nice win in the prep. Express Train won the Santa Anita Handicap. I mean, these are legitimate older horses. And none of them could even put up a fight. Not just one, all of them. That's when you know that the performance and the margin of victory was just out of this world. So that's what I'm thinking about Flightline. And again, I go back. Again, my reference point is a little farther back than yours, but I remember watching Forgo and those kind of horses, and marveling at their performance. But they never won races by 20 lengths. You know what I'm saying? It was this. That's what made this special. The margin of victory, as was the 31 length margin of victory for Secretariat's Belmont, made that special because of the margin. And you have to look at that and say, who could have absolutely run that well and done that to that field other than that horse?
And the times and the speed figures that go along with it, right? It wasn't just a mismatch that created the separation down the stretch. It was the speed that caused it. Buyer speed figure, this was the fastest race, I believe, since the Iselin back in 2004 that got a 126 buyer for the great Ghost Zapper. I'm not a big numbers guy. I know you use them as a reference point, but let's use our eyeballs here a little bit, Jeff. I was able to find on YouTube that Iselin Stakes from Monmouth Park back in 2004. We just saw the race from Flightline, which is in a speed figure discussion. We just saw that race. Now let's look at that Iselin Stakes and let's come back out of that and see which one do we think actually performed better?
It's a two-horse race, Ghost Zapper and Presidential Affair, and Ghost Zapper has taken the lead at the top of the stretch, and he moves away by a length and a half. Presidential Affair is running his heart out in second. The rest of the field well behind. It is Ghost Zapper, and he's just far too classy. He goes by the 16th pole by himself and lengthens his lead to the wire. Ghost Zapper and Javier Castellano win the Iselin by 8 lengths.
A young Larry Comas, or younger Larry Comas with the call there at Monmouth Park. Look, Ghost Zapper impressive there, but he had to be ridden to the 3/16th, to put away Presidential Affair. This was already an embarrassing margin by that point for Flightline. So, the need down the stretch to finish up, Flightline needed a lot less effort in the tank to do it. Sloppy track there in the Iselin can be weird and throw figure makers off a little bit too. I mean, if you're going to say numbers versus numbers, eyes versus eyes, who do you take? The Iselin performance there by Ghost Zapper or what we saw from Flightline in the Pacific Classic?
Well, Ghost Zapper was a great horse, but that race, if that's a 128, which it was on the buyer scale, Flightline had to be a 138, and if you go back and look at the best buyers from the last 30 years, I think the buyers were first printed in the DRF in the early 90s. Ghost Zapper got that 128 that you mentioned. Flightline 126, Formal Gold 126, Richard Mandela Train Gentleman 126, Will's Way 126, Formal Gold again 125, Skip Away 125, and Bertranda 125. I mean, we tend to think of horses way in the past as being maybe better than they are, but those horses are not better than Flightline. I'm telling you, it's just not real, So, but it's just a number. I actually thought he deserved 130 and something. But really, when you think about it, it doesn't really matter. Other than from a historical standpoint, you'd like for it to be accurate, and I'm sure the buyer people who put together the numbers believe that it is. But I have a right to disagree, even though they're not my numbers. And I think that Flightline's race, if that doesn't get a 130 or more better, there never will be one again.
Well, there's room for improvement in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Okay, I mean, you get there, and if he does the same thing again, and parking lots him at Keeneland and sends him up over the hill to Calumet in margin of victory, then he's going to get up over that number.
Okay,
I think,
fair enough
at that point. But in terms of Ghost Zapper, Flightline, different horses, not that different of eras, but the eyeball test tells me there's been nothing more impressive than Flightline. And like you said, you're going back to Spectacular Bid and Secretariat, and I'm cool with that because you have a perspective on that. And if he's in the same breath with those two names, that tells you all you need to know.
Well, I want to bring up one thing, though, and that is that, again, my era, which is not too many people's era anymore. Most people don't go back as far as I do.
Well, hang around a little bit more. We need you.
Yeah, well, I'm not going anywhere yet. But there are things, though, that if you really want to get picky about this, there are things that Flightline hasn't done that some of the great horses that I saw did. For example, and it's a different era. Okay, he's never going to have to carry weight. We know that. Yeah. Great horses in my era had to tote weight. For example, Forgo and Kelso. Mm-hmm. Now, they lost. Those horses were horses that were great race horses, not only because they won a lot of great races, but because they carried a lot of weight. Mm-hmm. For example, Kelso won the Jockey Club Gold Cup 5 times in a row. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is an incredible achievement, because the Jockey Club Gold Club at that time was essentially the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Right.
And Kelso used to carry a lot of weight. I mean, Forgo, remember him? He won the Marlboro Cup. He carried 137 pounds, beating Honest Pleasure, one of the great races I ever saw. Spectacular Bid. He won 26 out of 30 races. 2 of those were at 1.5 miles. That was his kryptonite. He wasn't really a 1.5 mile horse. And then the other 2 losses were in August of his 2-year-old season. Otherwise, he'd won 26 races, and he won his last 10. And his last race in the Woodward, he didn't even win the race because there was nobody in the race. Nobody showed up to run. It was a walkover. So when I go back to comparing Flightline to those horses, there are certain things that Flightline will never have a chance to prove that he could do that they did. For Dr. Fager, for example. One year, Dr. Fager was Horse of the Year, Champion Handicap Horse, Champion Spinner, and Champion Turf Horse, all in the same year. He only ran on the grass 1 time. It was in the United Nations. He won that race by a pole. And they gave him Champion Grass Horse because they knew that if he ran his whole life on grass, no one would ever beat him anyway. Might as well give him the title. Right. So he did that. And he carried 139 pounds when he won the Vosburg. So these are things that those horses had to do, that Flightline will never be asked to do. Yeah. And I'm not saying he couldn't do it, but he never will have to do it.
Right.
And those horses, I mentioned, Kelso 63 starts, Forgo 57 starts. I mean, this horse has run 5 times,
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can't really compare it. All you can say is that the Flightline that you and I saw in the Pacific Classic probably is as good as any of those horses on their best day. That's what I'll concede. So
he's got as good a stuff as any pitcher in baseball, but nobody's throwing 7 no-hitters again like Nolan Ryan did, right? I mean, it's like one of those things. Like you can be remarkable once, but nobody's going to be remarkable over and over and over again. Just the way sports are these days, with all-time type feats. He's got at least 1 big race left in him. We'll see if there's more, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Back to the big board we go on this Flightline edition. What impact does Flightline's huge win on Saturday have on the Breeders' Cup coming up the first Saturday in November at Keeneland? Jeff, there's some thought that this could scare some competition away. We went back and looked a little bit at the history books. In 1995, when Cigar was in the midst of his big winning streak, he has still had 10 rivals lining up against him for a $3 million Breeders' Cup Classic. Right. Now it's $6 million, but like we talked, sports have changed. There's not as many people willing to go out and try to run for second. So what can we expect? When we saw American Pharoah at Keeneland back in 2015 in the Breeders' Cup there, the American Pharoah took on 7 rivals in a field of 8 when he was heavily favored. But he was a 3-year-old coming off a loss. There might have been a little bit of thought that maybe we can get him at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. There's not that kind of feeling with Flightline. So what can we expect for the Breeders' Cup?
Yeah, I think there's going to be more horses in that race than I originally thought, because I think everybody wants to knock off the top dog. Mm-hmm. I mean, nobody thought Onion could beat Secretariat. We did, and so upsets will happen. We've seen it before, and I think a lot of these trainers are going to think, I really have nothing to lose because nobody expects my horse to win. And Flightline is going to be obviously a 2 to 5 or 1 to 5 or whatever price that he's going to be. But Olympian, I mean, he's got nothing to lose. I don't think he's got much chance. I mean, for example, Flightline earned the buyer number. We'll go with what they posted, 126. Olympia had 105 when he won the Jockey Club Gold Cup. I mean, that sounds like a Golden State Warrior versus Sacramento King basketball final score with Curry going for 35, 126 to 105.
Yeah.
But they'll probably be in there. Hot Rod Charlie, those guys want to be there for sure. They want to be part of the deal. Epicenter, I think, has the most to gain because, again, he's a 3-year-old, but he earned a 112 buyer number. And I think the people who are involved with Epicenter will say, maybe we can improve. Maybe he'll come back to earth. There has to be a closure there somewhere. But we're just a 3-year-old. Nobody really expects us to beat the best older horse. What happens if he does? And if he runs second, we might enhance his reputation and his value just by running a good second. What do we got to lose? Rich Strike, he's going to be there because they probably think anything's possible, and probably is true. Country Grammar, Taba. I mean, Life is Good. Now, the Life is Good is a horse that they might not want to get him trounced. You know what I mean? Right. There's a horse that has got a great reputation, but if he goes out and goes head and head with Flightline, and Flightline puts him away, and Life is Good folds up, that's not the kind of race you want going into your stud career, getting exposed that way. I could see Life is Good winning this race coming up at Aqueduct, and then maybe coming up with a phantom injury or something, or maybe going back to the mile, although I'm not sure they want to do that because he's already done that. And Happy Saver will probably be in there as well. So, I mean, it's going to be a good enough field where it's going to be a race. But I'm not sure any of those horses, maybe with the exception of Epicenter, because we really don't know how good he is. And he's a 3-year-old who's developing. I think the rest of them are in for a pretty rude awakening if they have any illusions of beating Flightline.
The way this graphic's built, I think you got Flightline on top. You got the 2 older horses that are pretty solidly pointing that direction. So that gives us a field of 3. I think Epicenter and Rich Strike are the 3-year-olds that would be interested here. I don't think Chad Brown's interested probably in sending some of his horses, the Zandons of the world, to go to the Breeders' Cup Classic in this kind of case. So that gets us to 5. Then you got the 2 Bafferts, right? Country Grammar and his 3-year-old Taba, who's going to go in the PA Derby. We'll know whether that horse is classic bound after the PA Derby in September. So maybe one of the Bafferts gets you to 6, and then one of the Pletchers on the bottom, right? Life is Good or Happy Saver. Happy Saver's more of a distance horse and an older horse. It's kind of, just a handicap division runner. And then Life is Good, obviously the more brilliant of the 2, who may or may not make it to the Breeders' Cup to preserve, his reputation. I agree with that sentiment, but that could get us to 7, like with this graphic, right? 1 Baffert, 1 Pletcher, and then the 5 on the top 2 lines. Now we're looking at, a Breeders' Cup Classic field that's probably in the ballpark of realistic 7-8 horses for a Breeders' Cup Classic worth $6 million. The Jeff Day bet last weekend on the potential of the Breeders' Cup. It closed on Monday with the second future wager pool for the Breeders' Cup Classic. To no surprise, Flightline was heavily favored in here at 4-5 with 24 wagering interest, fairly significant there. The top 4, Epicenter at 7. Life is Good at 8, and Olympia at 8. They lined up the way you would expect there. It's curious to get to the 5th choice now. You get all the way to 33-1 with Taba. So it is a field of 4 in the public's mind as far as the Breeders' Cup Classic goes in terms of where that line gets drawn. And for Life is Good, he may or may not end up in this race. What I thought was interesting here is the 4-5 on Flightline. The way I looked at it, there's about 16 points in this line that won't be in the Breeders' Cup Classic field because there are 24 wagering interests, right? So you take all the percentages of what these horses at 40, 50, 60-1 got, and you put it back into the tote. Where does it go? So Flightline is 4-5 against 24 horses, but almost all that money, 16 points of it, when you add it up beyond the top 6, 8, 10 horses in here, is almost assured to go towards Flightline, or at least 90% of it. So you would have to think, his classic are in that 1-5, 2-5 range with a realistic field of 8.
The only horse on the board there that would intrigue me is, and I'm not saying I would do it or whether it's even a good bet or not, but I really think Epicenter he showed me in the Travers, and he is for real and fast. He left his previous form behind. He earned a 112 buyer number with the expectation that maybe as a 3-year-old, developing 3-year-old, he can get better. Now, he can't beat Flightline if Flightline shows up. But what if Flightline doesn't show up? Then you're getting, now you're taking 7-1. You still have a chance to cash if you took 7-1 if Flightline shows up and runs in the race but doesn't fire or what something happens to him. But whatever happens to Flightline, or something happens to Flightline, we've seen this act before where you're supposed to you can see the race and all of a sudden the horse gets hurt and he's not even in the race.
Yeah.
Then suddenly 7-1 looks pretty good. So you can almost gamble a little bit on taking, if you liked Epicenter as much as I like him now.
Yeah.
I wish I liked him when you liked him, but when you loved him in the Travers, and I thought he was vulnerable. But anyway, I think that he is now better than the rest of them as a 3. He's faster than the rest of them on numbers, so that and he's got a chance to get even better. So 7-1 would look pretty good in a future book bet if all of a sudden Flightline is not in the field. So that's the only gamble I would make if I even was inclined to do it. Otherwise, I'm not seeing how any of those long shots are going to offer you any value.
Do not want to be a pessimist or come off as a doomsayer or anything, but Flightline and Life is Good both have had trouble staying sound and getting to the races and hitting a target date. Like the Breeders' Cup is a target date. It doesn't change for anybody. It will be the first Saturday in November. If neither of those are in there, Epicenter is probably 8-5 to win the Breeders' Cup Classic.
I would take that in a heartbeat if I got 8-5 on Breeders' Cup Day without Flightline in the race. So 7-1, if the gamble is there, I don't wish it happens, and I'm not going to probably play it. I'm not going to do it or anything like that. I didn't do it, but bottom line is, if you have 7-1 on that colt, that's probably what you're thinking, that there's a chance maybe something might happen, which we don't want to see. But gamblers don't care about that. They just want to cash.
And as far as the beneficiary of Flightline's success in the Classic division, that has to be the Dirt Mile, right? There are going to be some horses that come over to the Dirt Mile now to avoid the Classic that bolsters and makes that race stronger. Charlestown Classic winner Art Collector's got to be in that. He's got to be a Dirt Mile horse. Now, Bill Mott trains Olympiad as well. He just got the exclamation point he needed with that horse bouncing back and winning the Jockey Club Gold Cup. So it almost feels like Art Collector's got to go to the Dirt Mile. I would think Chad Brown's good 3-year-olds, the Preakness winner, early voting, Zandon, those kind of horses would seem like, okay, let's aim for the Dirt Mile now. I don't think we need to be biting off the Big Apple against Flightline. Although second money in the Classic is $1 million. Let's not kid ourselves. It's a lot of money to run second, but you got to beat Epicenter and everybody else to do that too. That's no easy spot. But I would think some of those horses moving over to the Dirt Mile, and I would think if Life is Good, it's good. Maybe the sexy move for Life is Good is to try the sprint. Jackie's Warrior just got beat. He's a little bit vulnerable. And it is a difference on the resume that you already won the Breeders' Cup Mile. There's nothing to gain there. There's a chance of being exposed going long against Flightline. What about turning Life is Good back to the sprint? We saw he won the Nehru at 7/8, I believe, earlier this year at Belmont Park. Definitely a more prestigious race, worth more money to win the Breeders' Cup Sprint in the Dirt Mile. I think it's not out of the question, if we see Life is Good on Breeders' Cup Day, that the sprint might be the best place for him.
Well, not only that, but don't forget, Life is Good has never really been trained to be a sprinter, which means they've never really cranked him up. You train horses differently. You try to get him to relax. But if you go back and look at Life is Good's first race, it looks a lot like Flightline's first race, sprinting. And they've already won the mile. So, to me, I think that it's either don't run them or maybe go back and win the sprint. That would be kind of interesting to see if they went that route, especially if he doesn't win his next race, which I think he probably will. But bottom line is that there's some movement there. As for the Breeders' Cup Mile, you talked about a potentially salty race. There's a horse out here that I don't think has to take a backseat to anybody. That's Laurel River. I think he is really, really, really good. And even though he won the Pat O'Brien going 7/8, he's a better horse going a mile. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a really interesting gambling race if we get all the upstart 3-year-olds that
Cyberknife would fit in there probably better than the Classic now.
I mean, even although I'm pretty sure he'll end up going in the Classic, but even a horse like Tabo, he won his first start sprinting like King Kong, and they don't train him to sprint after that because all the money is in the longer races. So you kind of switch him off and you get him to relax and you do all these things. But if you really want to wind a horse up and you've got a couple of months to do it, you can have a horse, cranked to the gills and have him run like they're capable if you give them a chance to do that. So that's an interesting thought. A lot of movement here and a lot of people trying to avoid the Classic, but I don't know. Some of them I think will still show up because, again, if you knock out, there's so much to gain by winning that race.
Yeah.
And if you run second, no one's going to hold it against you. That's the beauty of it.
So we've looked at the ripples to the Breeders' Cup. We've compared historically with Flightline. Now let's go across the pond for topic number 3. Is Flightline a better steed than Baid? Baid, of course, the brilliant British turf miler who stretched out to win the Juddmonte International most recently at 1.25 miles. He is 10 for 10 lifetime Jeff Siegel. He's won his last 6 in a row, and everybody in Europe says he's the best horse there since Frankel. So we have 2 generational talents running at the same time worldwide. They're on different surfaces. They're on different continents. How do we want to look at these two? Baid, Flightline. How do we compare?
You really can't. I mean, like I mentioned last week, how do you compare the best offensive guard in the NFL with Tom Brady? They're apples and oranges. They're 2 different positions. They're 2 different skill sets. You got one horse who's 1.25 mile and a turf horse. You got this colt, Flightline, who's been running on the dirt. They'll never meet, unfortunately. Right. But I was interested to see what Timeform had to say. Now, Timeform rates European horses, but they also do rate American horses. I don't know how they do it. I don't know what context they use, what methods they use, but it's interesting to see the opinions of people over there and how they overseas believe that they compare. So I went and looked at the Timeform ratings for this year, and I'm going to ask you, what do you think? I mean, they're European. They know what they probably back their own, horse, their own provincial favoritism. What do you think? I mean, would they be equal? Would one be better than the other? What do you think Timeform did with these 2 horses?
It's got to be home cooking, right? I mean, they're not going to pick an American horse as faster than the European horse with God's green turf and everything that goes with British racing and as it was meant to be. So Timeform's leaning to Baid, right?
That's what I thought. It's not even that close, believe it or not. Flightline currently has a Timeform rating of 143, Baid 137. So take that. I mean, that's kind of shocking to me. It's a blowout. And by the way, so what is that? Okay, so I'm not going to try to explain what that means. People know what buyer numbers are, but this is 143 to 137. What I did then is go back and check Timeform's highest annual ratings. Now these are, I guess, their end of the season rankings. They're not based on one race. It's kind of a compilation of all the races and coming up with one number that kind of reflects the entire year. The highest rated horse of all time in Europe, according to Timeform, was Frankel. I'll live with that. Okay. 147. Okay. Seabird, who was an amazing horse back in the 60s. I never saw him run, but I saw a film of him. 145. Brigadier Gerard was an incredible miler, 144. I believe. Tudor Minstrel, who was a great horse back in the 40s, I think, 144. And then Flightline at 143. Ahead of the immortal Rebo, who was 142, Mill Reef, 141. So, I mean, that's a pretty high opinion from Timeform from a horse who's only run 5 times. 4 times.
You almost get the feeling they appreciate the horse more than we do stateside.
Right. No, I mean, it is. So for me, I was shocked, but it does goes to show you what the world thinks of him. And so we kind of think, we always boost up our horses, So, but Timeform has him at that. Timeform thinks more of him than the buyer numbers do, for example. Yeah. I mean, you ask Timeform, well, you give Flightline a 143. Where does Will's Way figure in your equation? You got the same number. No. Yeah. So anyway, I think that from that standpoint, Flightline is worldwide, and it's not just us who marvel at his incredible abilities. It's the world, and I was glad to see that. Now, having said that, I think Baid is pretty great. I really do. I don't know whether he's Frankel, who was 14 for 14, and Baid though hasn't had that chance yet. One of the greatest races I ever saw, by the way, and even though he didn't win by a longer margin, was Frankel when he won the Juddman International going a mile and a quarter. Because up until that time, they mostly thought of him as being a miler, and the same thing with this gold. So, but they are obviously incredible horses. But we get a lot of these. I remember when they told us about how great Dancing Brave was and how great See the Stars. And
86 Breeders' Cup turf. Dancing Brave could not lose.
Exactly.
Having the mutton chops, John McCrick was all over it. There was no way Dancing Brave could possibly lose it.
But I do think Baid is a great horse. I think on using any kind of metric, and for time form to think that he's 6 points below on their ratings than Flightline tells me I'm pretty impressed with time form that they would admit that. So.
And you said that they won't match up. We won't get to see it. No. There's one race left in the career for Baid that's supposed to come either on Champions Day at Ascot, which I believe is October 15th, or in the Arc de Triomphe. So it's going to be a big send-off. I mean, the horse is going to get a world-renowned final race. They're not skipping anything, but one more race for Baid in his career. So we won't see that. We will see, of course, one more race this year from the great Flightline. One thing I think it's interesting, Jeff, we're trying to do this hypothetically, right? Who be two? Well, one runs on dirt, one runs on turf, so it's kind of tough to figure. But Baid is by See the Stars, and he's got a pure turf pedigree. Everything about him says turf.
Right.
For Flightline, he's by Tappet, who's very effective with siring horses for the turf. So we know Flightline can run on the dirt, and I think by Tappet, he would be just fine on turf as well. As for Baid, we don't know how he would handle the dirt with that See the Stars pedigree. So on a neutral field made of neutral surfaces in a neutral mindset that will never come down, I'm going to take Flightline. I think he's a little more versatile. How's that? Interesting
that you mentioned, because both prefer firm ground. So if we could ever find firm ground to have these two horses square off, they would be right. You mentioned Tappet. I don't think Flightline would be inconvenienced by grass in any way, shape, or form. He's obviously quicker than the other horse. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think time form's got this one right. I really do. I think that they ever ran against each other under conditions that would favor both of them. You'd have to give Flightline the edge, even though the other horse is remarkable. The only way to settle this is to get him on the tapeta at Golden Gate. That's it. Match race, get Matt Ditterman as pumped up as he could possibly be with about 10 energy drinks to call it. And just let him go. 1 1/8 on the tapeta at Golden Gate Fields. You could go to that famous restroom and look out the window at Alcatraz or the Golden Gate Bridge or whatever it is. Yeah. This is the only way we can settle this international debate. Let's try to get that set up. Let's go back to the big board for our fourth topic this week on It's Official. Is it wishful thinking for 2023 that we will see Flightline back in the racing game, or is he headed off the stud after the Breeders' Cup? Jeff, there's been a little bit of talk that amongst some of the connections, he's owned by 5 different entities. One of them is a syndicate that's got probably 100 partners on this horse. I mean, there are a lot of people who've got their hands in the schedule for Flightline and what his future plans might be. Is it just wishful thinking to see him in 2023? Normally, I would say yes, because financially it makes no sense to run him, considering what his stud fee would be and how many mares they could breed and what the revenue stream would be, as opposed to chancing it and running him as a 5-year-old. It doesn't make a lot of financial sense, not to mention insurance and all those other things that would have to be considered. But these are people that want to run, and they might say, forget it. We want to run this horse. But if they did that, to make it even remotely sensible, Jeremy, they'd have to run in races like the Dubai Cup and the Saudi Cup and the Pacific, and the race at Gulfstream Park, the Pegasus, and obviously the Breeders' Cup, and they'd have to win every one of them. What could they earn if they won all those races, which is still a big if, trying to keep a horse healthy and in training for that long. What could they earn doing that?
I feel like Bob Barker, it's like, well, tell them what they won. I mean, if you were able to win those 3 races, it looks like if the Pegasus is at 3 million, that's 1.7 to the winner. Saudi Cup at 20 million gives you 9 million to the winner, and a Dubai World Cup at 12 million pays 7 million to the winner. So my quick math tells me $17.7 million before you get out of the month of March, or if the Dubai World Cup's the first week of April coming up this year. Haven't seen the calendar yet, but if you just did the first quarter of the year, there's a potential there of 17.7 million based on last year's purse structure. And I just have this sneaky feeling, and I don't want to talk for the logo above my head or anything like that, but I would have to think if they can get Flightline after a Breeders' Cup to run in the Pegasus, there's probably some sweetener involved beyond just the regular $3 million purse. They're either going to jack the purse up, go for an appearance fee or something, because if they are going to run in 2023, it will be all hands on deck trying to recruit this horse to run at your destination.
Going to have some serious NIL money involved in that, yes, I think. But,
yes.
But now, okay, that's fine. That's assuming he won all those races and stayed healthy enough to win and travel the world, which is a hassle. Let's face it, when you have a horse that's valuable. But what about how much money could he generate if he went to stud? Okay, compared to what you just mentioned. All right, I'm going to throw out some numbers here. These are wild estimates, okay?
Okay.
But there's some precedent in trying to come up with these figures, so I don't think I'm too far off. Mm-hmm. All right, let's just say, for example, that he gets retired to stud and he stands for $150,000 live foal. Okay, that's less than. I mean, he's an unproven stallion. You may say that he could get more than that. I'm trying to lowball it here. Just be fair. 150,000. Let's say he breeds 100 mares. Let's say lowball. He gets 80 foals. Okay. Some of them don't get in foals. Some of them don't. They're not born live. So that at 150,000 times 80, that's $12 million in revenue without having to run a race. Now, if you figure that he's going to have 4 crops before the first one even runs, that makes him worth essentially the same, $12 million for the first 4 years. That's close to $50 million. So if you have to insure him for $50 million in that year that you're racing him, that's a good few $1 million right there, not to mention everything else. So if they were convinced that it was financially reasonable to do this, which it wasn't back in Secretariat's day, they didn't have these crazy Saudi Arabia races to go to. Then, if you can convince yourself you're going to win them all, then it's not that far-fetched, really.
Yeah.
The difference, especially when you're talking about people who aren't going to worry about whether they lose $1 million here or there. They don't care.
Right.
So maybe it will happen. I don't know. I as a horse racing fan, it's not my money. Sure, I hope he stays in training. Hey, I got 2 horses in John Sadler's barn. I can see him every day if I want. So I mean, that's a thrill. So to me, it's not that far fetched. I hope they do it. If it was me, would I do it? Of course not. But I'm not them. So we'll see what happens.
He's, a brilliant horse who reminds a lot of people of Arrogate, in terms of the brilliance, even more so. Right. Arrogate got really good, did go overseas, win the big races. But remember with Arrogate, when he came back from Dubai, he lost the last 3 races of his career.
Correct.
So you don't want that to happen with Flightline, the way it ended with Arrogate, obviously. So if he were to go overseas and run up those big scores in those big money races, that would be it at that point. That's where you pull the plug. I think you don't come back with the American campaign after the fact. And look, we're talking about running 3 races in January, March, and March for a horse who's been able to run, 5 races total for, the last year and a half. So that's a lot of expectations, but it's fun to think about. You never want to spend somebody else's money. That's one of the first lessons I learned as being a sports writer. A veteran sports writer said, when you're covering sports, never tell somebody how to spend their money. It's a good tip that I've tried to, keep tucked away over the years. They'll do what they want to do with this horse. Jane Lyon of Summer Wind Farm was the breeder of this horse, who still owns part. I don't know how the partnership is now. There have been different owners with Flightline who have come along as the process is going, from fold to sold and all the shares and everything like that. So Who gets to call the shots on that? We'll find out at some point in time. But let's get him to the Breeders' Cup first and foremost.
Yeah.
Worry about 2023 when that comes up. That's going to wrap our talk of Flightline, but maybe we'll find the next Flightline as we've tried to do all Saratoga and Del Mar this season. Our Stars of Tomorrow is the fifth and final topic each week. We had a couple stakes races this week at Saratoga for the hopeful for the 2-year-old Colts and the spinaway for the Phillies. The spinaway had a 14-1 upset winner, Leave No Trace. She doesn't necessarily look like one who's a big hitter for the future, but the hopeful look to have a little bit more of a presence maybe on Breeders' Cup Day. Let's go back and watch Forte.
Gulfport in front, Bourbon Bash, Gulfport going wide there. Forte is coming through now on the inside, and there's 3/16 to the finish. It is Gulfport and Forte, and the two of them are right together. It is Forte to grab the lead now from Gulfport. It is Forte in front. Forte on to victory here in the slop, under the rain, in the Grade 1 hopeful. Forte won by 3. Gulfport was second. And
well, Jeff, we love the hopeful because it caps off the Saratoga meet, and it's the best 2-year-olds we've seen in New York and Kentucky getting together. But it hasn't been a vastly superior race in terms of producing route horses. The last hopeful winner who turned out to really be a good 3-year-old router, Fleet Alex in 2004. It's been a long time.
It's been a while, yeah.
Before that and some others, but this race has produced really good sprinters. Gunite, Jackie's Warrior over the past couple of years. Is Forte a horse we're going to be talking about next year on the Triple Crown Trail, or is this a horse stay short, or just a good 2-year-old at the right place at the right time?
I think he'll run on. I do. I loved his maiden win at Belmont back in early May, and then he disappointed me, and like everybody else, when he was a rather modest fourth in the Sanford. This was the Forte that I expected to see last time. He's a good mover. He's out of a mare by Blame. Violence himself was a really good horse by Medaglia d'Oro, so there's enough pedigree there that would suggest he should be every bit as good routing, if not better, than sprinting. He's a good athlete, a good mover. If he had broken his maiden and not run in the Sanford, and then came out and did this, then I would really be high on him. But I don't know about that last race. And, of course, you're dealing with an off track, which kind of muddles everything. You don't know what you're going to see on fast ground. So I think, but it was a good, fast race, legitimate race. And so I think he's got a chance to be pretty good. I do. And we'll see. Wasn't overwhelmed with the spin away, a little bit disappointing run there by Wonder Wheel, who I thought had a chance to be a good filly. And she had a good chance. She had a good spot and just kept grinding. And somebody who won it, might be okay. She's undefeated in 2 starts, but I don't know about that group. But I think in this particular case, I think Forte's got a chance to be okay.
Yeah, Spinaway's produced the 2-year-old filly champion the last 2 years. This year might be a little bit of a stretch to see, but now we'll have to find out after Wonder Wheel was defeated in there. Del Mar will get its chance to show off with the 2-year-olds during its closing weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, with 3 more days left of racing this year. Remember, they started a week later than Saratoga, extending a week beyond. We'll have the Del Mar Debutante and the Del Mar Futurity still to come. Over the Labor Day weekend, there were some 2-year-olds in action at Del Mar, and Bob Baffert had Carla, a $950,000 yearling buy that everybody thought couldn't lose. And then the other Baffert had.
Top of the lane, she's in the army now, but along the inside, Hunting Coco now takes the lead and kicks away. And it's all Hunting Coco as they come to the 16th. Carla's running on late to get second, but Hunting Coco and Ramon Vasquez win this one by 6 or 7. Carla will get second. Moonlit Mischief ran on third, and then Canthara.
So, Jeff, the other Baffert Hunting Coco, Pennsylvania bred, something I can embrace there at least. This was a $200,000 2-year-old buy, not the big time pedigree with the yearling and spending all the money and developing. This was kind of a win now horse, and Hunting Coco sure did in her first start. What do you make of her?
She looked good to me. I mean, I thought, honestly, I'd watched Carla train, and I was really high on her. And she was like 1-2 or something. And this was the other filly who had been training at Los Alamitos and didn't get much play. She was 7-1, but she never looked like she was not going to run well from the start of the race. She went the first quarter in 21 and small change, pressing the pace, came away when asked, gave a second burst, that second move, ran down there in 3 and change. Legitimate race, fast race, did it the right way, took heat, drew off, won with something left. Practical Joke, I mean, he's a good horse. You could get a good horse. And she brought $200,000. This despite the fact that there was nothing in the first dam. So she obviously previewed very well, which she did at the Timonium. But I don't know whether this filly ran in on Bob Baffert or whether this was expected. But I can tell you, when you have a filly that good, you can't be that surprised when she runs that well. I was actually more disappointed in Carla's race because I thought she was the goods. Daughter of Medalla d'Oro, who they gave 9-something for, 950. She was, I think, supposed to win. But hunting Coco, that was no fluke. And I think you'll see her in graded stakes next time out. And I wouldn't be surprised from what I've seen here in California so far among the fillies. I think she's as good as I've seen so far. Now, how far she wants to run, you never know with the Practical Jokes, but so far so good. And around one turn, she's going to be really good.
Breeders' Cup prep around 2 turns at Santa Anita coming up in early October to set you up for the Breeders' Cup. We'll see which one of those fillies might be able to stretch out in distance, and we'll see which filly steps up in the Del Mar Debutante this coming racing week and the Del Mar Futurity as well to wrap up the action at Del Mar for the 2022 summer meet. That's going to wrap up It's Official for this edition. The all Flightline Love Fest. If you didn't get enough Flightline, there's plenty of places you can Google and go check out more stuff and go to YouTube and watch as much as you can. If you think you got too much Flightline, we'll be back next week with 5 more diverse topics as we wrap up Del Mar and Kentucky Downs for the big weekend of racing as well. So, Jeff, a little bit easier time for you here with Saratoga in the rearview mirror, but you'll still have a lot of great analysis for final weekend at Del Mar at Express Bet.
A lot of people were sad to see Saratoga close. Not me. Doing 2 tracks, full card tracks with all the workouts and everything like that. I'm glad it's over. We got one more week of Del Mar, and then we'll take a little bit of a break and then wait for Santa Anita to gear up right around the October 1st or thereabouts. But actually, it was a really good meeting at Saratoga. We had a good handicapping run there. Workouts from our crew were very, very good, spot on for most part. So I enjoyed it. We got 3 more days of Del Mar and a good weekend. I always like to see the 2-year-olds with the debutante and the futurity, see if we have the next Flightline somewhere out there that we'll be able to discover. But in the meantime, been a good week. Got plenty of great racing coming ahead next week and the week after that. So we'll be back at the grind and go for it.
And as we release on Tuesdays with It's Official, Virginia Derby, just a couple hours away at Colonial Downs. So enjoy that, playing with a First Bet and Express Bet. Jeff and I will be back on Friday as we have our First Call podcast where we review 8 stakes races, preview 8 stakes races for each weekend. So between now and then, for my partner Jeff Siegel, I'm Jeremy Plonk. We'll talk to you Friday. But as of now, it's official because we said so.